Have you ever wondered what happened to the dinners that once brought millions of American families together every single night? Before takeout, frozen meals, and fast food became the norm, homemade suppers filled kitchens with unforgettable aromas and created memories that lasted a lifetime. Today, we are stepping back into the 1970s to uncover 30 forgotten dinners that were once household favorites but have nearly vanished from American tables. Some will bring back cherished memories, while others may leave you wondering why they ever disappeared. Let's turn back the clock and rediscover these delicious lost classics. 1. Beef stroganoff. Few dinners captured the spirit of 1970s home cooking quite like beef stroganoff. Rich, creamy, and surprisingly elegant, it was the kind of meal that made an ordinary weeknight feel a little more special. The moment tender strips of beef began sizzling with onions and mushrooms, kitchens filled with an aroma that promised comfort long before everyone gathered around the table. For countless American families, this was more than dinner. It was a reminder that even modest ingredients could become something memorable. Although beef stroganoff first appeared in 19th century Russia, it found a devoted following in the United States after World War II. By the 1970s, the recipe had become a household favorite thanks to community cookbooks, women's magazines, and the growing popularity of convenient pantry staples. Many home cooks adapted the traditional recipe by using cream of mushroom soup, creating a version that was quicker, less expensive, and perfect for busy family schedules without sacrificing its rich flavor. The classic meal combines strips of beef with sautéed mushrooms, onions, sour cream, and savory seasonings, all served over a generous bed of warm egg noodles. Every bite balanced creamy sauce with tender meat, making it one of the decade's most satisfying comfort foods. Families often paired it with buttered green beans, peas, or a crisp salad, turning a simple supper into a complete meal everyone looked forward to. What truly made beef stroganoff unforgettable was how perfectly it matched the changing lifestyle of the 1970s. As grocery prices climbed and more households searched for practical yet comforting meals, this dish offered both affordability and a touch of sophistication. It proved that a family dinner did not need expensive ingredients to feel special. While it rarely appears on modern dinner tables today, its creamy, nostalgic flavor remains a lasting symbol of an era when homemade suppers brought families together night after night. 2. Chicken à la king. Long before rotisserie chicken and meal prep containers became everyday conveniences, there was one creamy classic that could transform yesterday's leftovers into a dinner the whole family eagerly anticipated. Chicken à la king was one of the shining stars of 1970s American kitchens, proving that a simple recipe could feel elegant enough for company while remaining practical enough for an ordinary weeknight. Despite its royal-sounding name, chicken à la king was created in the United States during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, though several famous New York hotels claimed to be its birthplace. By the 1970s, it had become a staple in countless American households, thanks to its versatility and the growing popularity of convenient canned ingredients. Women's magazines and family cookbooks frequently featured the recipe, encouraging busy home cooks to prepare it ahead of time and simply reheat it before serving. The traditional version combined tender pieces of chicken with mushrooms, sweet pimentos, and occasionally green peas, all gently folded into a rich cream sauce seasoned with butter, chicken broth, and a touch of black pepper. The creamy mixture was most often served over fluffy rice, crisp toast points, buttered biscuits, or delicate puff pastry shells. The result was a warm, satisfying meal that looked far more impressive than the effort it required. Chicken à la king perfectly reflected the changing American household of the 1970s. As more women balanced careers with family life, recipes that saved time without sacrificing comfort became increasingly valuable. Leftover roasted chicken could easily become an entirely new dinner, helping families reduce waste while stretching the grocery budget during years of rising food prices. Although it has quietly disappeared from many modern menus, chicken à la king remains a reminder of an era when home cooks relied on creativity rather than convenience alone. Every creamy spoonful carried the warmth of family kitchens, where simple ingredients and thoughtful cooking turned ordinary evenings into memories that lasted for generations. 3. Fondue. Before casual restaurants became the favorite place for a night out, One unforgettable meal turned ordinary dinners into lively social events. During the 1970s, fondue was far more than melted cheese in a pot. It was an experience that encouraged friends and family to slow down, gather around the table, and share conversation one bite at a time. For many Americans, owning a fondue set became almost as fashionable as serving the meal itself. Fondue originated centuries earlier in Switzerland, where villagers melted Gruyere and Emmental cheeses with white wine to make stale bread both delicious and filling during the winter months. The dish reached the United States in the post-war years, but it truly exploded in popularity throughout the 1970s. Newly married couples often received fondue pots as wedding gifts, while department stores proudly displayed colorful sets that quickly became must-have kitchen accessories for modern households. The traditional cheese fondue blended Gruyere, Emmental, dry white wine, garlic, and a touch of cornstarch until perfectly smooth. Guests used long forks to dip cubes of crusty bread into the bubbling cheese, creating an interactive meal unlike anything most American families had experienced before. As the decade progressed, creative home cooks experimented with beef fondue cooked in hot oil and rich chocolate fondue served with strawberries, marshmallows, and fresh fruit for dessert. Fondue reflected the relaxed, entertaining style that defined the 1970s. Instead of spending the evening rushing between the kitchen and dining room, hosts could prepare everything in advance and enjoy the meal alongside their guests. The shared pot naturally encouraged laughter, storytelling, and long conversations that often lasted well after dinner had ended. Although fondue occasionally returns during holidays and special occasions, it no longer holds the place it once did in American homes. Yet for those who remember the decade, the sight of a steaming fondue pot still recalls evenings filled with friendship, warm kitchens, and the simple joy of sharing food together, one delicious bite after another. For quiche Lorraine. There was a time when serving quiche Lorraine at dinner made an ordinary meal feel effortlessly sophisticated. During the 1970s, this French-inspired classic appeared everywhere, from family brunches and neighborhood gatherings to elegant dinner parties. Its golden, flaky crust and rich, creamy filling gave home cooks a simple way to serve something that looked as though it had come straight from a fine restaurant. Quiche Lorraine traces its roots to the Lorraine region of northeastern France, where the original version featured a buttery pastry filled with eggs, cream, and smoked bacon. As French cuisine gained popularity in the United States during the 1960s and 1970s, American home cooks eagerly embraced the dish. Cookbooks, cooking magazines, and television chefs introduced it as an approachable recipe that combined European charm with everyday ingredients, making it ideal for families wanting to try something new. The traditional filling blended crisp bacon, Swiss cheese, eggs, heavy cream, and a touch of nutmeg before being baked inside a flaky pastry shell until perfectly golden. Many households added onions, mushrooms, or spinach, although purists preferred the simpler original version. Served warm alongside a crisp green salad or fresh fruit, quiche Lorraine offered a satisfying balance of rich flavor and delicate texture that appealed to both adults and children. One reason the dish became such a favorite during the 1970s was its flexibility. It could be prepared ahead of time, served for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and tasted just as delicious at room temperature. Busy families appreciated having a meal that could easily fit into changing schedules without sacrificing quality or presentation. By the end of the decade, quiche Lorraine had become a symbol of fashionable home entertaining, representing America's growing fascination with international cuisine. Although it has never completely disappeared, it no longer enjoys the widespread popularity it once held. Still, every slice brings back memories of an era when experimenting with a classic French recipe made dinner feel just a little more special and every gathering seemed a touch more elegant. 5. Swedish meatballs. Long before flat-pack furniture and Scandinavian restaurants made them famous, Swedish meatballs had already earned a cherished place on American dinner tables. Throughout the 1970s, these tender little meatballs were considered both comforting and elegant, making them equally at home during weeknight family dinners and festive holiday gatherings. Their rich aroma of sizzling butter, savory beef, and warm spices often filled the kitchen long before the meal was ready, drawing everyone eagerly to the table. The recipe originated in Sweden centuries ago, where meatballs were traditionally served with cream sauce, boiled potatoes, and tart lingonberry preserves. As international cuisine became increasingly popular in the United States after World War II, Swedish meatballs slowly found their way into American cookbooks and restaurants. By the 1970s, they had become one of the country's favorite European-inspired comfort foods, appearing in church cookbooks, community recipe collections, and countless family meal plans. Traditional Swedish meatballs combined ground beef and pork with breadcrumbs, onions, milk, eggs, and a delicate blend of nutmeg and allspice. After being browned until perfectly tender, they were simmered in a velvety cream gravy that coated every bite with rich flavor. Many families served them over buttered egg noodles or creamy mashed potatoes, while others stayed closer to Scandinavian tradition by adding boiled potatoes and a spoonful of sweet tart lingonberry jam. Part of their appeal was their remarkable versatility. They were hearty enough for a family supper, yet elegant enough to serve guests at cocktail parties or holiday celebrations. During an era when Americans eagerly explored cuisines from around the world, Swedish meatballs offered just enough international flair without feeling unfamiliar or intimidating. Although they still appear on some restaurant menus today, Swedish meatballs no longer dominate home kitchens the way they once did. Yet for many who grew up in the 1970s, one bite instantly recalls cozy family dinners, handwritten recipe cards tucked inside kitchen drawers, and evenings when a simple homemade meal brought everyone together around the table. 6. Salisbury steak. Few dinners captured the heart of 1970s American comfort food quite like Salisbury steak. It looked hearty, smelled wonderful, and could satisfy an entire family without stretching the grocery budget too far. As thick beef patties simmered in rich brown gravy with onions and mushrooms, the comforting aroma drifting through the kitchen promised a filling meal that everyone could enjoy. For many families, it became one of those dependable dinners that appeared on the table again and again. Despite its name, Salisbury steak is not actually a steak at all. The dish was created in the late 19th century by American physician Dr. James H. Salisbury, who believed minced beef was an important part of a healthy diet. Over time, home cooks transformed his simple concept into a flavorful family favorite. By the 1970s, Salisbury steak had become a regular feature in community cookbooks, school cafeterias, television dinners, and home kitchens across the United States. The traditional recipe combined seasoned ground beef with breadcrumbs, onions, eggs, and simple spices before shaping the mixture into oval patties. After browning them in a skillet, they were slowly simmered in a savory gravy made with beef broth, onions, mushrooms, and a splash of Worcestershire sauce. Served with creamy mashed potatoes and buttered green peas, the rich gravy tied every bite together, creating the kind of meal that left everyone feeling full and satisfied. During the economic challenges of the 1970s, Salisbury steak became especially popular because it stretched affordable ingredients without sacrificing flavor. Families could feed several people with a single package of ground beef, making it both practical and comforting. Busy parents also appreciated that the entire meal could be prepared in one pan with very little waste. Although Salisbury steak still appears in some diners and frozen dinners today, it has largely disappeared from everyday family menus. Even so, it remains a lasting reminder of a decade when simple ingredients, homemade gravy, and shared dinners around the kitchen table created memories that were every bit as comforting as the meal itself. I'd like to highlight another dinner that quietly became a family favorite during the 1970s. Unlike many casseroles of the era, this one brought together fresh vegetables, creamy sauce, and tender chicken in a way that felt both comforting and sophisticated. Chicken divan was the kind of meal that could turn leftover roast chicken into something guests would happily believe had been made from scratch. As it baked in the oven, its bubbling cheese topping and savory aroma filled the house, making it almost impossible not to gather around the dinner table before it was even ready. Chicken divan first appeared in the early 20th century at the Divan Parisian restaurant in New York City, where it was originally served as an elegant entree featuring chicken and broccoli in a rich cream sauce. Over the following decades, the recipe spread through restaurants, cookbooks, and newspaper food columns. By the 1970s, it had become one of America's favorite casseroles, thanks in part to the growing popularity of convenient pantry staples that allowed busy families to prepare impressive meals with less effort. The classic version combined tender chicken, broccoli florets, cream sauce, Parmesan cheese, and a generous layer of shredded cheese before being baked until golden and bubbling. Many home cooks added cream of chicken soup or mayonnaise to simplify preparation, creating the rich, creamy texture that became the dish's signature. Served alongside buttered rice or warm dinner rolls, chicken daivan offered a complete and satisfying meal that pleased both children and adults. Its popularity reflected the changing pace of American life during the 1970s. Families needed dinners that could be assembled ahead of time, refrigerated, and baked just before supper. Chicken daivan fit that lifestyle perfectly, making it a favorite for weeknight meals, church suppers, and neighborhood potlucks alike. Although it no longer appears on dinner tables as often as it once did, chicken daivan remains a delicious reminder of an era when homemade casseroles brought warmth, convenience, and togetherness to kitchens across America, proving that simple ingredients could create unforgettable family traditions. 8. Stuffed bell peppers. At first glance, they looked almost too beautiful to eat. Bright green bell peppers, standing upright in a baking dish, were filled to the brim with a hearty mixture of seasoned beef, fluffy rice, and rich tomato sauce. As they baked in the oven, their sweet aroma blended with savory spices, creating a dinner that felt both wholesome and comforting. During the 1970s, stuffed bell peppers became a familiar sight on American dinner tables, proving that simple ingredients could be transformed into a meal that looked as impressive as it tasted. Although stuffed vegetables have existed in many cultures for centuries, the American version gained widespread popularity during the mid-20th century. By the 1970s, the recipe had become a staple in community cookbooks, newspaper food columns, and women's magazines. Home cooks appreciated its ability to stretch a modest amount of ground beef into a filling family meal while adding colorful vegetables that made the dinner table more inviting. The traditional recipe combined ground beef, cooked rice, chopped onions, tomato sauce, garlic, and simple seasonings before carefully filling hollowed bell peppers. The peppers were then baked until perfectly tender, allowing every ingredient to blend into a rich, savory filling. Many families topped them with shredded cheddar or mozzarella during the final few minutes of baking, creating a golden layer of melted cheese that made each serving even more satisfying. Stuffed bell peppers perfectly reflected the practical cooking style of the 1970s. They were economical, nutritious, and easy to prepare ahead of time for busy evenings. Leftover rice or cooked beef could be used without waste, making the dish especially valuable during years when families carefully watched their grocery budgets. Although today's kitchens often favor quicker one-pan meals, stuffed bell peppers have quietly faded from everyday menus. Yet they remain a symbol of an era when home-cooked dinners were made with patience, creativity, and care. Every colorful pepper carried more than a delicious filling. It carried the comforting tradition of families gathering together to share a meal made from the heart. 9. Tuna noodle casserole. Few dinners defined the spirit of practical 1970s home cooking better than tuna noodle casserole. It was warm, filling, affordable, and capable of feeding an entire family with ingredients that were already sitting in the pantry. As the casserole baked, the scent of creamy sauce, tender noodles, and its crispy golden topping drifted through the house, signaling that another comforting family supper was almost ready. It was the kind of meal that proved delicious dinners did not have to be expensive. The origins of tuna noodle casserole can be traced back to the years of the Great Depression and World War II, when American families learned to create satisfying meals from inexpensive pantry staples. By the 1970s, the recipe had become one of the nation's most dependable weeknight dinners. Women's magazines, church cookbooks, and community recipe collections all featured their own versions, making it a familiar favorite in kitchens across the country. The traditional recipe brought together egg noodles, canned tuna, cream of mushroom soup, milk, and sweet peas, creating a creamy mixture that was poured into a baking dish. Before going into the oven, the casserole was topped with crushed potato chips, buttered breadcrumbs, or crispy fried onions, forming a crunchy layer that contrasted perfectly with the rich filling beneath. Served alongside buttered vegetables or a simple green salad, It became a complete meal that satisfied both children and adults. Its popularity during the 1970s reflected the realities of everyday American life. Families wanted meals that were affordable, easy to prepare, and capable of stretching a grocery budget without sacrificing flavor. Tuna noodle casserole checked every box while offering the comfort of a homemade dinner after a busy day. Although it is often remembered today as a symbol of vintage American cooking, tuna noodle casserole once represented ingenuity and practicality. For countless families, it was far more than a simple casserole. It was a dependable meal that brought everyone to the table, creating memories of laughter, conversation, and the comforting taste of home that still lingers decades later. 10. Ham steak with pineapple. There was something unforgettable about the moment a thick ham steak hit a hot skillet, followed by a sweet pineapple ring gently caramelizing on top. The combination of smoky, salty ham and juicy tropical fruits seemed surprisingly sophisticated, yet it required very little effort to prepare. During the 1970s, ham steak with pineapple became one of America's favorite weeknight dinners, bringing a touch of island-inspired flavor to ordinary family meals and making even a simple supper feel like a special occasion. Ham and fruit had been paired together for generations, but the dish gained widespread popularity in the United States during the 1950s and reached its peak in the 1970s. As canned pineapple became a pantry staple, home cooks embraced recipes that blended sweet and savory flavors. Cookbooks, grocery advertisements, and women's magazines frequently featured ham steak with pineapple as an easy meal that looked elegant without requiring hours in the kitchen. The traditional preparation was wonderfully simple. A thick slice of fully cooked ham was browned in a skillet until lightly caramelized, then topped with a pineapple ring that warmed in the pan, allowing its natural sweetness to blend with the smoky meat. Many families finished the dish with a maraschino cherry in the center of the pineapple, giving it a colorful presentation that became one of the meal's most recognizable trademarks. It was commonly served with scalloped potatoes, buttered green beans, or glazed carrots, creating a hearty and satisfying dinner. The popularity of this meal reflected America's growing fascination with tropical flavors during the 1970s. Hawaiian-inspired recipes appeared everywhere, from backyard cookouts to holiday tables, bringing a sense of adventure to everyday cooking while still relying on affordable, easy-to-find ingredients. Although ham steak with pineapple has quietly faded from most modern dinner menus, it remains a delicious reminder of a time when colorful presentation, comforting flavors, and a little culinary creativity could transform an ordinary evening into a memorable family gathering. One bite still carries the warmth, optimism, and nostalgic charm of the 1970s dinner table. 11. Chicken cordon bleu. Before restaurant-quality meals became available in supermarket freezers, there was one dish that instantly made any family dinner feel like a celebration. Chicken cordon bleu brought together crispy golden breadcrumbs, tender chicken, savory ham, and melted Swiss cheese in a combination that seemed wonderfully luxurious. The first slice revealed warm, gooey cheese flowing from the center, creating a moment that delighted dinner guests and made this elegant entree one of the most admired meals of the 1970s. Although its exact origins are still debated, chicken cordon bleu is widely associated with Switzerland and French culinary traditions. The name, meaning blue ribbon, became synonymous with excellence in cooking. By the late 1960s and throughout the 1970s, the dish had gained tremendous popularity across the United States. It appeared on restaurant menus, in gourmet cookbooks, and eventually in home kitchens, where ambitious cooks enjoyed recreating a meal that once seemed reserved for fine dining. The classic recipe began with boneless chicken breasts carefully pounded thin before being layered with slices of ham and Swiss cheese. The chicken was rolled tightly, coated in flour, egg, and breadcrumbs, then baked or fried until the outside became crisp and beautifully golden. Inside, the melted cheese blended perfectly with the smoky ham, creating a rich filling that contrasted with the crunchy coating. It was often served with rice pilaf, buttered asparagus, or roasted potatoes, making the meal both elegant and satisfying. For many families during the 1970s, chicken cordon bleu became the perfect choice for birthdays, anniversaries, and holiday dinners. It reflected America's growing fascination with European cuisine while remaining approachable enough for determined home cooks willing to try something new. Although simpler chicken recipes have largely replaced it on today's dinner tables, chicken cordon bleu remains a symbol of an era when preparing an elaborate homemade meal was a source of pride. Its crispy crust, creamy center, and timeless presentation continue to remind many Americans of special evenings shared with family and friends around the dinner table. 12. Steak Diane. Long before celebrity chefs turned cooking into entertainment, there was one dinner that amazed guests the moment it arrived at the table. Steak Diane was not just a meal, it was a performance. The sight of a tender steak sizzling in a rich butter sauce, followed by the dramatic splash of brandy igniting into bright blue flames, made it one of the most unforgettable dining experiences of the 1970s. For many Americans, ordering steak Diane or preparing it at home meant the evening had become something truly special. Although the exact origin of steak Diane remains uncertain, the dish became famous in upscale New York restaurants during the 1950s before reaching peak popularity in the 1970s. Inspired by classic European cuisine and named after Diana, the Roman goddess of the hunt, it quickly earned a reputation as one of the finest beef dishes of its era. As gourmet cooking gained popularity in American homes, ambitious home cooks began recreating this restaurant favorite for dinner parties and holiday celebrations. The traditional recipe featured a tender beef tenderloin or filet mignon quickly seared in butter before being finished with a luxurious pan sauce made from mushrooms, shallots, Dijon mustard, Worcestershire sauce, cream, and a splash of brandy or cognac. Many cooks performed the famous flambé technique, allowing the alcohol to burn away while deepening the sauce's rich flavor. The finished steak was often served alongside buttery mashed potatoes, roasted asparagus, or glazed carrots, creating an elegant meal worthy of any special occasion. During the 1970s, steak Diane perfectly reflected America's fascination with fine dining and tableside presentation. Families who wanted to impress guests embraced the dish because it combined classic flavors with unforgettable visual drama, turning dinner into an event everyone remembered. Today, steak Diane is rarely seen outside traditional steakhouses, yet it remains a symbol of an era when preparing an elegant homemade dinner was an expression of pride, hospitality, and timeless culinary craftsmanship that brought unforgettable moments to the family table. 13th. Duck à l'orange. There was a time when serving duck for dinner instantly transformed an ordinary evening into an unforgettable occasion. Among the most admired dishes of the 1970s was duck à l'orange, a French classic that paired rich roasted duck with a bright citrus sauce. The irresistible aroma of crisp, golden skin mingling with sweet oranges and butter created a meal that felt refined, elegant, and worthy of the most important celebrations. For many Americans, it was the ultimate symbol of sophisticated home entertaining. Duck à l'orange has its roots in French cuisine, although versions of duck served with fruit sauces existed long before the recipe became famous in France. During the 1960s and 1970s, America's fascination with European cooking grew rapidly thanks to celebrated chefs, popular cookbooks, and television cooking programs. As adventurous home cooks looked beyond traditional American meals, duck à l'orange became one of the era's most impressive dishes, often reserved for holidays, anniversaries, and formal dinner parties. The traditional preparation began by roasting a whole duck until the skin turned beautifully crisp while the meat remained tender and juicy. The signature sauce combined fresh orange juice, orange zest, rich stock, butter, and a touch of sugar, creating the perfect balance of sweet and savory flavors. Many classic recipes also included a splash of orange liqueur to deepen the citrus aroma. Served with roasted potatoes, wild rice, or buttered vegetables, the dish delivered a restaurant-quality experience right at the family table. Preparing duck à l'orange required patience and confidence, making it a meal that many home cooks proudly mastered during the 1970s. Successfully serving it to guests was often seen as a sign of culinary skill, reflecting the decades' growing appreciation for authentic international cuisine and carefully prepared homemade dinners. Although this elegant classic has become increasingly rare on modern dinner tables, duck à l'orange remains a delicious reminder of an era when families embraced ambitious cooking projects, celebrated special occasions with unforgettable meals, and believed that sharing exceptional food was one of life's greatest pleasures. 14. Waldorf salad. Not every memorable 1970s dinner centered on a hearty casserole or a sizzling roast. Sometimes, it was a crisp, refreshing side dish that quietly stole the spotlight. Waldorf salad brought together sweet apples, crunchy celery, juicy grapes, and toasted walnuts in a creamy dressing that felt both light and elegant. Whether served alongside baked ham, roast chicken, or a holiday turkey, it added a burst of freshness that perfectly balanced the richer flavors on the dinner table. Waldorf salad was first created in 1896 at New York City's famous Waldorf Astoria Hotel. The original recipe was surprisingly simple, featuring only apples, celery, and mayonnaise. As the decades passed, home cooks began adding walnuts, grapes, and other ingredients, transforming it into the familiar version that became a favorite across America. By the 1970s, it regularly appeared in family cookbooks, church potlucks, holiday buffets, and neighborhood dinner parties, earning its place as one of the decade's most recognizable salads. The classic preparation combined crisp red apples, finely sliced celery, seedless grapes, chopped walnuts, and a creamy mayonnaise-based dressing with a touch of lemon juice to keep the fruit bright and fresh. Some families added a pinch of sugar or a spoonful of whipped cream for extra sweetness, while others served the salad on crisp lettuce leaves or inside hollowed apple halves for an elegant presentation. Its refreshing texture made it the perfect companion to heavier main dishes. During the 1970s, Waldorf salad reflected America's growing appreciation for attractive food presentation and balanced meals. Hosts loved serving it because it could be prepared hours in advance, freeing them to enjoy time with family and guests instead of rushing around the kitchen before dinner. Although it is less common on today's dinner tables, Waldorf salad remains a timeless reminder of an era when even a simple side dish was prepared with care. Every crisp bite brings back memories of family celebrations, holiday feasts, and the welcoming spirit that made every shared meal feel just a little more special. 15. Veal Oscar. There was a time when serving veal Oscar at the dinner table signaled that the evening was meant to be unforgettable. This luxurious dish combined tender veal, delicate crab meat, fresh asparagus, and silky hollandaise sauce into a meal that looked as though it belonged in the finest restaurants. During the 1970s, veal Oscar became a favorite choice for elegant dinner parties and milestone celebrations, offering home cooks an opportunity to impress guests with a truly sophisticated entree. The dish is believed to have been named in honor of King Oscar II of Sweden, a monarch known for his appreciation of fine cuisine. Although its exact origins date back to the late 19th century, veal Oscar gained widespread recognition in American restaurants during the 1960s and reached the height of its popularity throughout the following decade. As interest in European-inspired cooking continued to grow, ambitious home cooks embraced recipes that showcased premium ingredients and refined presentation. The traditional preparation began with tender veal cutlets that were lightly seasoned and carefully sautéed in butter until perfectly golden. Each cutlet was then topped with sweet lump crab meat and crisp asparagus spears before being generously covered with warm hollandaise sauce. The creamy richness of the sauce complemented the delicate veal without overpowering it, creating an elegant balance of flavors. Roasted baby potatoes, buttered vegetables, or wild rice often completed the meal, making it worthy of the most special occasions. During the 1970s, veal Oscar reflected America's fascination with continental cuisine and restaurant-style dining at home. Serving such an elaborate dish demonstrated patience, confidence, and culinary skill, making it a source of pride for many hosts entertaining family and friends. Although veal Oscar has become increasingly rare outside classic steakhouses and traditional fine dining restaurants, it remains a remarkable reminder of an era when preparing an impressive homemade dinner was an event in itself. Every beautifully plated serving celebrated craftsmanship, hospitality, and the belief that life's most meaningful moments deserved a meal that guests would remember long after the evening had ended. 16. Sole Meunière. Before grilled salmon and trendy seafood bowls became restaurant favorites, there was a delicate fish dish that symbolized elegance on the 1970s dinner table. Sole Meunière was admired for its simplicity, proving that a handful of quality ingredients could create an unforgettable meal. As the butter gently browned in the pan and the fresh lemon filled the kitchen with its bright aroma, this French classic transformed an ordinary evening into a refined dining experience that families proudly shared on special occasions. Sole Meunière originated in France, where its name, meunière, refers to the traditional method of lightly coating fish in flour before cooking it in butter. Although the recipe had existed for generations, it gained tremendous popularity in the United States during the 1960s and 1970s as Americans developed a growing appreciation for classic French cuisine. Influential cookbooks and television chefs introduced the dish to home kitchens, encouraging cooks to discover that elegant meals did not always require complicated techniques. The traditional recipe began with fresh Dover sole or lemon sole lightly dusted with flour, seasoned with salt and pepper, then gently sautéed in butter until the fish developed a delicate golden crust. Once perfectly cooked, it was finished with browned butter, fresh lemon juice, and chopped parsley. The result was a light yet flavorful entree that highlighted the natural sweetness of the fish instead of masking it with heavy sauces. Buttered new potatoes, steamed green beans, or tender asparagus completed the meal beautifully. During the 1970s, Sole Meunière reflected a growing shift toward lighter dinners without sacrificing sophistication. It became a favorite choice for dinner parties because it looked elegant, cooked quickly, and impressed guests with its refined presentation. Preparing it successfully showed that a home cook understood both restraint and technique. Although it rarely appears on modern family menus today, Sole Meunière remains one of the timeless classics of the decade. Every buttery, lemon-infused bite recalls an era when simple ingredients, careful preparation, and graceful presentation came together to create a dinner that felt both comforting and unforgettable. 17. Chicken Kiev. Few dinners created as much anticipation as chicken Kiev. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary breaded chicken breast, crisp and beautifully golden. But the real magic happened with the very first cut. As the knife sliced through the crunchy coating, a stream of warm garlic herb butter flowed onto the plate, turning a simple dinner into an unforgettable experience. During the 1970s, this dramatic moment delighted dinner guests and made chicken Kiev one of the most impressive meals a home cook could serve. The exact origins of chicken Kiev remain the subject of debate. Some historians trace it to French culinary traditions, while others credit chefs in Kiev, Ukraine, with perfecting the recipe during the early 20th century. Whatever its beginnings, the dish gained international recognition after World War II and reached the height of its popularity in the United States throughout the 1970s. As Americans embraced European-inspired cuisine, chicken Kiev quickly became a favorite for elegant dinners, restaurant menus, and special family celebrations. The classic preparation required patience and careful technique. Boneless chicken breasts were gently pounded thin before being wrapped around a chilled mixture of butter, fresh parsley, garlic, and herbs. The chicken was then coated in flour, dipped in beaten eggs, covered with breadcrumbs, and fried or baked until perfectly crisp. Keeping the butter sealed inside during cooking was considered the true test of a skilled home cook. The finished dish was often served with rice pilaf, buttered vegetables, or roasted potatoes to soak up every drop of the flavorful melted butter. Chicken Kiev perfectly reflected the adventurous spirit of 1970s home entertaining. Families were eager to explore international recipes while still preparing meals that felt warm and comforting. Serving this elegant dish showed confidence in the kitchen and added a touch of restaurant-style sophistication to the family table. Although it appears less often on today's dinner menus, chicken Kiev remains a beloved reminder of a decade when homemade meals were filled with craftsmanship, excitement, and the simple pleasure of gathering together to enjoy something truly memorable. 18. Baked Alaska. No dessert ended a 1970s dinner with more drama than baked Alaska. At first glance, it looked impossible, a beautifully browned meringue covering frozen ice cream without melting it. Guests often watched in amazement as the golden dessert was carried to the table, wondering how something could be hot on the outside and frozen in the center at the very same time. For many families, serving baked Alaska was more than offering dessert. It was putting on a memorable performance that everyone would talk about long after the meal had ended. Baked Alaska first appeared in the United States during the late 19th century, shortly after Alaska became an American territory. The dessert was created to celebrate the remarkable contrast between heat and cold, using fluffy meringue as an insulating layer around frozen ice cream. Although it had existed for decades, it experienced a remarkable revival during the 1970s, when elaborate dinner parties and impressive homemade desserts became symbols of gracious entertaining and culinary creativity. The traditional recipe began with a layer of sponge cake topped with firm ice cream, usually vanilla, chocolate, or strawberry. The entire dessert was then completely covered with thick, whipped meringue, carefully sealing every inch of the ice cream inside. After a brief trip into a very hot oven, the meringue turned beautifully golden while the frozen center remained perfectly chilled. Some adventurous hosts even added a splash of rum or brandy before lighting the dessert, creating a spectacular flaming presentation that delighted guests. During the 1970s, Baked Alaska represented the era's love of theatrical dining. It required careful planning, precise timing, and a bit of confidence, making it a favorite choice for birthdays, anniversaries, holiday dinners, and elegant celebrations where hosts wanted to leave a lasting impression. Although few families prepare Baked Alaska today, it remains one of the most unforgettable desserts ever served at the American dinner table. Every slice recalls a decade when entertaining was an event, presentation mattered almost as much as flavor, and dessert was often the grand finale everyone eagerly anticipated. 19. Veal Marsala. There was a time when a simple bottle of Marsala wine could transform an ordinary dinner into something worthy of a fine Italian restaurant. During the 1970s, veal Marsala became one of America's favorite continental dishes, admired for its tender meat and rich, savory sauce. As thin veal cutlets gently sizzled in butter and the sweet aroma of Marsala wine blended with earthy mushrooms, the kitchen filled with a fragrance that promised an elegant meal long before the first plate reached the table. Veal Marsala originated in Sicily, where the region's famous fortified Marsala wine had been produced since the 18th century. Italian immigrants introduced the recipe to the United States, but it was not until the 1960s and 1970s that the dish truly gained widespread popularity. As Americans became increasingly interested in authentic regional Italian cooking beyond spaghetti and meatballs, veal Marsala found its place on restaurant menus, in gourmet cookbooks, and eventually in home kitchens across the country. The traditional preparation began with thin veal cutlets lightly coated in flour before being sautéed in butter until beautifully golden. Fresh mushrooms were added to the pan, followed by Marsala wine, which reduced into a rich, glossy sauce that perfectly complemented the delicate veal. Many cooks finished the sauce with a small amount of beef stock and butter for extra depth. Served with buttered pasta, roasted potatoes, or steamed vegetables, the meal balanced rich flavors with remarkable simplicity. During the 1970s, veal Marsala reflected America's growing appreciation for restaurant-quality meals prepared at home. It offered families an opportunity to experience authentic Italian flavors without traveling overseas, making it a popular choice for anniversaries, dinner parties, and holiday celebrations. Although it has become less common on today's family dinner tables, veal Marsala remains a timeless reminder of an era when home cooks eagerly embraced international cuisine. Its tender texture, velvety sauce, and unmistakable aroma continue to capture the warmth, elegance, and culinary curiosity that defined the unforgettable dinners of the 1970s. 20. Coquille's Saint-Jacques. Few seafood dishes made a stronger impression on 1970s dinner guests than Coquille's Saint-Jacques. Served in elegant scallop shells and bubbling with a creamy golden topping, it looked more like a restaurant masterpiece than something prepared in a family kitchen. The rich aroma of butter, white wine, and tender scallops drifting from the oven signaled that an ordinary evening had become a special occasion. For many Americans, this classic French dish represented the height of sophisticated home entertaining. Coquille's Saint-Jacques has its roots in French cuisine, where scallops have long been associated with the pilgrimage to St. James, giving the dish its famous name. Although it had been enjoyed in Europe for generations, it became increasingly popular in the United States during the 1960s and reached its peak throughout the 1970s. As Americans embraced French cooking through best-selling cookbooks and television programs, Ambitious home cooks began adding this elegant seafood entree to holiday menus and formal dinner parties. The traditional recipe featured tender sea scallops gently sautéed in butter before being combined with mushrooms, shallots, and a delicate sauce made from white wine, cream, and seafood stock. The mixture was spooned into scallop shells or individual baking dishes, topped with grated Gruyere or Parmesan cheese and seasoned breadcrumbs, then baked until the surface became beautifully golden and lightly crisp. It was often served alongside buttered asparagus, wild rice, or a fresh green salad, creating a meal that felt refined without being overwhelming. During the 1970s, Coquille's Saint-Jacques reflected America's growing confidence in preparing international cuisine at home. Families were eager to move beyond everyday comfort food and surprise guests with elegant recipes that demonstrated both skill and creativity. Although this French classic is rarely found on modern family dinner tables, it remains a lasting reminder of a decade when entertaining at home was treated as an art. Every creamy, seafood-filled bite recalls an era when beautiful presentation, thoughtful cooking, and shared celebrations turned dinner into an unforgettable experience that guests remembered long after the evening had ended. 21. Beef Wellington. Few dinners captured the ambition of 1970s home cooking quite like beef Wellington. The moment a beautifully golden pastry emerged from the oven, everyone at the table knew they were about to enjoy something extraordinary. Beneath the crisp, flaky crust waited a perfectly cooked beef tenderloin surrounded by a savory layer of mushrooms and pâté, creating a meal that looked as impressive as it tasted. For many families, preparing beef Wellington was not just cooking dinner. It was a celebration of skill, patience, and hospitality. Although its exact origins remain debated, beef Wellington is generally associated with British cuisine and is believed to have been named after Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington. By the late 1960s and throughout the 1970s, the dish had become a symbol of sophisticated entertaining in the United States. Gourmet magazines, televised cooking programs, and best-selling cookbooks inspired ambitious home cooks to recreate this restaurant-quality masterpiece for holidays, anniversaries, and memorable dinner parties. The traditional recipe began with a whole beef tenderloin that was quickly seared to lock in its juices. It was then coated with a finely chopped mushroom mixture known as duxelle, often accompanied by pâté, before being carefully wrapped in delicate puff pastry. After baking until the pastry turned beautifully crisp and golden, the beef inside remained tender and perfectly pink. The dish was commonly served with roasted potatoes, glazed carrots, or fresh green beans, creating an elegant meal worthy of the grandest occasions. During the 1970s, beef Wellington reflected America's growing fascination with European cuisine and elaborate home cooking. Successfully preparing it was considered a true culinary achievement, earning admiration from family members and dinner guests alike. Every slice revealed the beautiful layers that made the dish so unforgettable. Although beef Wellington appears less frequently on today's dinner tables, it remains one of the defining culinary icons of the decade. It reminds us of a time when special occasions called for extraordinary meals, careful preparation, and the simple joy of gathering loved ones around a table to share something truly remarkable. 22. Turkey tetrazzini. For countless American families, the holiday feast did not truly end when Thanksgiving dinner was over. The next evening often brought an equally anticipated meal that transformed leftover turkey into something entirely new. Turkey tetrazzini was creamy, hearty, and comforting, filling the kitchen with the rich aroma of butter, mushrooms, and bubbling cheese. During the 1970s, it became one of the nation's favorite casseroles, proving that leftovers could be just as memorable as the original holiday dinner. Turkey tetrazzini was created in the early 20th century and named in honor of celebrated Italian opera singer Luisa Tetrazzini. Although its exact birthplace is debated, many historians credit the Palace Hotel in San Francisco with popularizing the dish. By the 1970s, it had become a staple in American households, appearing regularly in community cookbooks, newspaper food columns, and women's magazines. Families embraced it as the perfect solution for using leftover roast turkey without serving the same meal twice. The traditional recipe combined tender pieces of cooked turkey with spaghetti, sautéed mushrooms, butter, onions, and a creamy sauce made from chicken broth, milk, and Parmesan cheese. Everything was gently mixed together before being topped with additional cheese or buttered breadcrumbs and baked until hot and beautifully golden. The creamy pasta, savory turkey, and crisp topping created a satisfying balance of flavors and textures that made every bite feel like comfort on a plate. During the 1970s, turkey tetrazzini perfectly reflected the practical approach to home cooking. Waste was discouraged, budgets mattered, and resourceful home cooks took pride in creating entirely new meals from leftovers. The casserole could easily feed a large family, making it ideal for busy households during the holiday season. Although it has become less common in modern kitchens, turkey tetrazzini remains a nostalgic reminder of an era when family recipes were passed from one generation to the next. It celebrated creativity, thrift, and togetherness, proving that some of the most cherished dinners were born from yesterday's feast and shared with loved ones around the table once again. 23. Beef bourguignon. Long before slow cookers became a kitchen essential, there was one hearty stew that rewarded patience like no other. Beef bourguignon filled the home with the irresistible aroma of slowly simmering beef, onions, mushrooms, herbs, and red wine, creating a dinner that felt both comforting and refined. During the 1970s, preparing this classic French dish became a badge of honor for home cooks who wanted to serve something truly memorable. Every pot seemed to promise that the best meals were never rushed. Beef bourguignon originated in the Burgundy region of France, where local cooks transformed inexpensive cuts of beef into tender, flavorful meals by braising them slowly in red wine. Although the recipe had existed for centuries, it gained remarkable popularity in the United States during the 1960s and 1970s. Influential chefs, best-selling cookbooks, and public television cooking programs introduced American families to authentic French cuisine, inspiring many to recreate this elegant country stew in their own kitchens. The traditional recipe began by browning chunks of beef before slowly simmering them with Burgundy wine, beef stock, pearl onions, mushrooms, garlic, carrots, and fragrant herbs such as thyme and bay leaf. Small pieces of bacon added an extra layer of smoky richness, while hours of gentle cooking transformed every ingredient into a deeply flavorful, velvety stew. It was commonly served with buttered egg noodles, mashed potatoes, or slices of crusty bread that soaked up every drop of the rich sauce. During the 1970s, beef bourguignon reflected America's growing appreciation for homemade meals that emphasized quality, patience, and authentic cooking techniques. Families often reserved it for Sunday dinners or special gatherings, where its rich aroma and impressive presentation made every guest feel welcome. Although modern life leaves little time for dishes that require hours of slow cooking, beef bourguignon remains a timeless reminder of an era when the finest dinners were created with care rather than speed. Every comforting spoonful recalls the warmth of family kitchens, meaningful conversations, and the enduring pleasure of sharing an unforgettable meal together. 24. Shrimp cocktail. Before the first bite of dinner was ever served, there was one classic appetizer that instantly signaled a special evening was about to begin. Shrimp cocktail was elegant without being complicated, offering chilled, perfectly cooked shrimp arranged around a sparkling glass filled with tangy cocktail sauce. During the 1970s, this timeless favorite appeared at dinner parties, holiday celebrations, and upscale restaurants across America, becoming the traditional way to welcome guests to the table. Although seafood cocktails had been enjoyed since the early 20th century, shrimp cocktail reached the height of its popularity during the 1960s and 1970s. Improvements in refrigeration and seafood distribution made quality shrimp more widely available, allowing families to enjoy what had once been considered a luxury. Restaurant menus almost always featured the dish, while home entertainers proudly served it as the opening course for anniversary dinners, Christmas feasts, and other memorable occasions. The traditional preparation was refreshingly simple. Large shrimp were gently boiled until tender, then immediately chilled to preserve their delicate texture. They were arranged neatly around the rim of a stemmed cocktail glass filled with a sauce made from ketchup, prepared horseradish, Worcestershire sauce, fresh lemon juice, and a dash of hot sauce. A wedge of lemon and a sprig of parsley completed the presentation, giving the appetizer its unmistakable appearance. Its cool freshness offered the perfect contrast before a rich main course. Shrimp cocktail reflected the entertaining style of the 1970s, when presentation mattered almost as much as flavor. Hosts appreciated that it could be prepared well in advance, allowing them to spend more time with family and guests instead of rushing in the kitchen before dinner. Although modern appetizers have introduced countless new flavors and trends, shrimp cocktail remains one of the most recognizable classics of the decade. Every chilled bite recalls an era when elegant entertaining, thoughtful presentation, and warm hospitality turned an ordinary evening into a celebration shared around the dinner table. 25. Surf and turf. Few dinners captured the spirit of celebration in the 1970s quite like surf and turf. Seeing a perfectly grilled steak served beside a buttery lobster tail instantly told everyone that the meal was no ordinary supper. It was the kind of dinner reserved for birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, and life's biggest milestones. As the aroma of sizzling beef mingled with the sweet scent of freshly cooked lobster and melted butter, the table became the center of an unforgettable evening shared with family and friends. Although the exact origin of surf and turf is still debated, the combination began appearing in North American restaurants during the early 1960s before reaching the height of its popularity throughout the 1970s. High-end steakhouses and seafood restaurants helped establish the pairing as the ultimate luxury meal. As prosperity grew and more Americans celebrated special occasions by dining out, surf and turf quickly became a symbol of success, indulgence, and fine dining that many families hoped to recreate at home. The traditional version featured a tender filet mignon or New York strip steak grilled to perfection alongside a broiled lobster tail brushed generously with melted butter. Fresh lemon wedges, baked potatoes topped with sour cream, and steamed asparagus or green beans completed the plate. Some home cooks also served drawn butter and béarnaise sauce, allowing guests to enjoy rich flavors that complemented both the steak and seafood without overwhelming their natural taste. During the 1970s, surf and turf represented more than an extravagant dinner. It reflected an era when sharing exceptional food was a way to celebrate achievements and bring loved ones together around the table. Preparing such a meal at home required planning and confidence, making it a source of pride for hosts who wanted every guest to feel truly special. Although modern dining trends have introduced countless new luxury dishes, surf and turf remains one of the defining meals of the decade. Every bite recalls a time when life's happiest moments were marked by generous portions, elegant presentation, and the simple joy of gathering together to enjoy an unforgettable feast. 26. Chicken marbella. Long before sweet and savory dinners became fashionable again, one unforgettable dish quietly earned a place on American tables during the late 1970s. Chicken marbella surprised guests with a combination of tender chicken, tangy olives, sweet prunes, garlic, and herbs that seemed unusual at first but became unforgettable after the very first bite. As it roasted in the oven, the aroma of caramelizing brown sugar, vinegar, and garlic filled the kitchen, creating a meal that felt both comforting and remarkably sophisticated. It quickly became the kind of recipe families proudly shared with friends after every successful dinner party. Chicken marbella first gained national attention after appearing in the Silver Palette cookbook, published in 1982, but the recipe had already been circulating among adventurous home cooks during the late 1970s through catering menus and New York food circles. At a time when Americans were becoming more curious about Mediterranean flavors, the dish introduced an exciting blend of sweet, savory, and briny ingredients that felt fresh while remaining surprisingly easy to prepare. The traditional recipe featured bone-in chicken marinated overnight with garlic, oregano, red wine vinegar, olive oil, green olives, capers, and prunes. Just before roasting, brown sugar was sprinkled over the chicken and a splash of white wine was added to the baking dish. As everything cooked together, the sauce thickened into a glossy glaze that coated every piece with rich, balanced flavor. It was commonly served with buttered rice, roasted potatoes, or crusty bread to soak up every drop of the delicious pan juices. What made chicken marbella so memorable was its ability to impress guests without demanding complicated techniques. Hosts could prepare nearly everything the night before, allowing them to spend less time in the kitchen and more time enjoying the company gathered around the table. Although it is no longer a common sight at family dinners, chicken marbella remains a delicious reminder of a time when American home cooking began embracing bold international flavors, proving that one unforgettable recipe could turn an ordinary evening into a celebration that guests remembered for years. 27. Cornish game hens. There was something undeniably special about placing an entire perfectly roasted bird on every dinner plate. During the 1970s, Cornish game hens became the centerpiece of countless holiday meals, anniversary dinners, and intimate dinner parties. Their crisp, golden skin and tender, juicy meat gave every guest the feeling of enjoying a restaurant-quality feast at home. As the birds roasted with butter, herbs, and garlic, the rich aroma filled the house, turning an ordinary evening into a celebration that families remembered long after the last bite. Despite their name, Cornish game hens are not wild game birds. They were developed in the United States during the mid-20th century by crossing Cornish and white Plymouth Rock chickens to create a smaller, tender bird ideal for individual servings. By the 1970s, they had become increasingly popular among American home cooks who wanted an elegant alternative to traditional roast chicken or turkey. Their manageable size also made them perfect for dinner parties, where every guest could be served a beautifully presented entree. The classic preparation was both simple and impressive. Each hen was rubbed generously with butter, garlic, salt, black pepper, rosemary, thyme, and parsley before being roasted until the skin became crisp and deeply golden. Many recipes included lemon wedges or onion inside the cavity to add extra flavor while roasting. The hens were often served with wild rice, roasted potatoes, glazed carrots, or green beans, creating a balanced meal that looked every bit as elegant as those found in upscale restaurants. Throughout the 1970s, Cornish game hens reflected America's growing appreciation for refined home entertaining. They allowed hosts to present a luxurious meal without the expense of larger premium meats, making every guest feel individually honored with their own beautifully roasted bird. Although they appear less frequently on modern dinner tables, Cornish game hens remain a timeless reminder of an era when presentation mattered, homemade meals were crafted with care, and special occasions were celebrated with elegant dishes that brought family and friends together around the table. 28. Stuffed flank steak. Before quick one-pan dinners became the norm, there was a hearty centerpiece that turned an ordinary family supper into a memorable occasion. Stuffed flank steak was one of those impressive meals that looked like it belonged in a restaurant, yet it often came from the family oven. As the beef slowly roasted, its savory aroma mingled with garlic, herbs, and seasoned bread stuffing, filling the house with the unmistakable scent of a special dinner. Sliced into beautiful pinwheels at the table, it never failed to earn compliments from family and guests alike. Stuffed flank steak became increasingly popular in American homes during the 1960s and reached its peak throughout the 1970s, when home cooks searched for creative ways to prepare economical cuts of beef. Rather than purchasing expensive steaks, families discovered that flank steak could be transformed into an elegant entree with a little extra care and preparation. Community cookbooks, butcher shop recipe cards, and women's magazines frequently featured variations of the dish, making it a favorite for Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. The traditional recipe began with a flank steak carefully butterflied and pounded until even in thickness. It was then layered with a savory stuffing made from breadcrumbs, onions, celery, parsley, garlic, and herbs, with some families adding chopped spinach, mushrooms, or grated Parmesan cheese. After being tightly rolled and secured with kitchen twine, the steak was roasted until tender before being sliced into attractive rounds that revealed the flavorful spiral inside. Mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, or buttered green beans completed the comforting meal. During the 1970s, stuffed flank steak perfectly reflected the era's practical approach to cooking. It stretched an affordable cut of meat while creating a dinner that looked elegant enough for entertaining. Preparing it required patience rather than expensive ingredients, making it especially appealing to families who valued both thrift and presentation. Although it is no longer a common sight on today's dinner tables, stuffed flank steak remains a lasting reminder of a time when resourceful home cooks transformed simple ingredients into impressive meals, proving that creativity and care could make any family dinner feel truly extraordinary. 29. Swiss steak. Long before slow cookers became a staple in American kitchens, Swiss steak was the dinner that taught families the value of patience. Tough cuts of beef were slowly transformed into fork-tender perfection, simmering for hours in a rich tomato gravy that filled the house with an irresistible aroma. It was the kind of comforting meal that made everyone eager to gather around the table, knowing a hearty homemade supper was waiting. Throughout the 1970s, Swiss steak remained one of the most dependable dinners for families seeking both flavor and value. Despite its name, Swiss steak has no connection to Switzerland. The word Swiss refers to the old-fashioned tenderizing technique known as Swissing, where tougher cuts of beef were pounded or rolled before cooking. This method helped break down the meat, allowing it to become wonderfully tender during slow braising. By the 1970s, Swiss steak had become a favorite across America, appearing in church cookbooks, family recipe collections, and newspaper food sections as an economical meal that never failed to satisfy. The traditional recipe started with round steak that was coated lightly in flour and browned until golden. It was then slowly braised with onions, celery, bell peppers, tomatoes, beef broth, and simple seasonings until the meat became incredibly tender. Many home cooks added carrots or mushrooms for extra flavor, while others served the finished steak over creamy mashed potatoes, buttered noodles, or fluffy white rice. The rich tomato gravy soaked into every side dish, making every bite warm and deeply satisfying. Swiss steak perfectly reflected the practical cooking traditions of the 1970s. Families appreciated meals that could stretch affordable ingredients while delivering homemade comfort after a long day. As the beef slowly cooked, it required very little attention, giving busy parents time to focus on everything else that filled their evenings. Although Swiss steak has gradually disappeared from many modern dinner tables, it remains a treasured reminder of an era when slow cooking, simple ingredients, and family recipes created unforgettable meals. Every tender bite tells the story of a generation that believed the best dinners were worth waiting for. 30. Liver and onions. Few dinners divided opinions quite like liver and onions, yet during the 1970s, it remained a familiar sight on dinner tables across America. While some children tried their best to avoid it, many parents and grandparents considered it one of the most nourishing meals they could serve. As thin slices of liver gently sizzled in a skillet beneath a blanket of sweet caramelized onions, the unmistakable aroma filled the kitchen, reminding families that good nutrition often came before personal preference. For millions of Americans, it was simply part of growing up. Liver and onions has deep roots in American home cooking, dating back to the 19th century when inexpensive organ meats played an important role in family meals. During the years following the Great Depression and into the 1970s, thrift remained an important value in many households. Because beef liver was affordable, widely available, and packed with nutrients such as iron and vitamin A, it became a dependable dinner for families looking to prepare wholesome meals without overspending. Doctors and nutrition experts of the era frequently recommended liver as one of the healthiest proteins available. The traditional recipe was straightforward but flavorful. Thin slices of beef liver were lightly coated in seasoned flour before being pan-fried in butter until just tender. Thick slices of onion were slowly cooked until soft and deeply caramelized, adding natural sweetness that balanced the liver's rich, earthy flavor. Many families served the dish with creamy mashed potatoes, buttered peas, or steamed carrots, creating a hearty meal that reflected the practical cooking traditions of the decade. Although liver and onions has largely disappeared from modern family menus, its legacy remains an important part of American culinary history. It represents a generation that valued resourcefulness, nutrition, and making the most of every ingredient. Whether loved or disliked, this humble dinner reminds us that the meals of the 1970s were about far more than flavor. They were about caring for family, avoiding waste, and gathering around the table to share whatever was prepared with love. That wraps up our journey through 30 forgotten dinners from the 1970s that have faded into history. These meals were more than recipes. They were part of family traditions, weeknight routines, and celebrations that brought loved ones together around the dinner table. Which of these forgotten classics do you remember, or which one would you love to taste again? Share your memories in the comments. We would love to hear your stories. If you enjoyed this nostalgic trip into America's culinary past, please give this video a thumbs up, Subscribe to America's Lost Recipes and join us for another journey into the forgotten flavors that shaped generations.